And he said to me, he said, I'm a man and I'm going to transition when I grow up, I'm going to become a man. And I said, yeah. Because again, I'm still thinking everybody thinks this, right? So I'm like, why is he telling me this, right? I'm like, yeah, no, me too, yeah. And he's like, no, I'm saying, and I don't think we had the word trans. I don't think that was the word that we had, but I can't remember what words he used. But he was like, no, like I'm gonna have surgery and I'm gonna become a man. And I was like, yeah, And then it was like, oh, wait a minute, this is actually not everyone's experience.
Hello, my name's Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, the podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories that they created there, and the people that they used to know. Okay, so it's quite well established on this show that queer spaces are magical as these places where you can dance and connect and lose yourself and find yourself in the arms of some strange man who smells of tobacco and vomit at 2 a.m. in the morning. But they are much, much more than that. They are also places for organising and activism. And I think those are things that we don't really talk about a lot on this show. Hopefully that will change. So this week I'm joined by activist Dr Syrus Marcus Ware, who joined me to talk about the Red Spot in Toronto, Canada. And this is a place where he unwound, met and connected with fellow organisers and planned protests and marches in that magical time known as the 90s. Oh yes, you heard me right. We are headed back to the 90s, one of the best decades of all time. I'm not going to hear otherwise. And what better way for us to start our conversation than for Cyrus to tell me all about how answering machines and pagers worked. Do you remember pagers? Well, let's get into it and find out some more, shall we?
I remember when we used to have to give a message to somebody, but we didn't have cell phones. So I would say to you, we're going to meet at the movie theaters at 3:30. Well, look, my bus is late. I'm not going to get there till 4. So I changed my outgoing voice message on my landline, and I would say, hey, if this is Kay, I am going to be an hour late and I'll meet you at 4 o'clock at the corner of Yonge and Bloor. If this is anybody else, please leave a message. And you would change your outgoing message so that when the person didn't see you there, they would call your phone, they'd hear the message, but so would everybody else who called you, right? It was just such a... Anyways, but we used to do all sorts of things.
So when you did that, did you change your message at home before you left? Or did you call from a payphone and then...
There was a way from the payphone. So you'd go to a payphone. And so, yeah, I have to think about the steps because it wasn't just to use your phone. So you'd go to a payphone with a quarter and you'd pay for the phone. And then the payphones were dirty and gross. They're way dirty. If you ever see a payphone now, they're just obliterated. But they were very dirty even then. So you'd pay for your call, gingerly hold the receiver, and then, change your outgoing. You call into this number. This is when there used to be when you had a voice... What did we used to call them? Answering machines. When you had an answering machine that was a hard object that existed in your house that you put a tape in, there was like a beeper number that you would call into and put in this code, and then it would play your message back to you. And then when it got more advanced, then you actually got voicemail that was connected like a digital voice box. And so then you could change your outgoing message by just calling into your thing. And so you would call into your thing, change your outgoing message, gingerly hang up the payphone, and then hope that the person called you and got the message. And then everyone else would just be used to it, and they'd be like, oh, hey, I hope you met so-and-so. I'm actually calling about this other thing.
Wow. But you've just actually sparked a memory for me about beepers. I never had a beeper don't really know how they work, but man, I wish beepers would make a comeback.
Yeah, they were really. I had a beeper. It was clear. You remember when there was everything in the early 2000s was clear plastic color, like the iMacs were clear plastic, turquoise or purple
Blow up
or
furniture.
the furniture. I had a blow up couch. I had a big ultramarine royal blue blow up couch. I had a blow up salad bowl, which was very impractical.
What?
You could only use wooden utensils with it.
I remember the blow up picture frames as well. Oh, they were amazing.
Blow up objects. They should come back. But this, so I had this see-through pager, so you could actually see the technology inside of it, which was kind of cool. And it was great. So someone would, call your pager number, and then they would enter in their number, and then you had about 10 minutes to call them back. So no matter where you were, you would kind of have to call them back right away because they weren't necessarily staying where they were at. So just because they told you that was their number, it wasn't a cell phone number, right? It was the number where they were at. So you would have to kind of like call them back within 10 minutes, or you would just call them and they wouldn't be there anymore. And then it was all fun and games until, you see, you would clip the pager usually on your pants, on your belt loop. That was what they were designed to be, was on your belt loop. And everyone, I don't care who you are, has a story of their pager falling in the toilet. Everyone has that story. Everyone does, because when you are fiddling with your pants and rushing to go pee, things happen. And so everybody has at least one pager in the toilet story. They were very impractical for that. And they were very impractical because you only had 10 minutes to call the person back. So it was, and they couldn't really give you a message, although they could type 911, which would let you know that this was like urgent. So they'd type in their phone number and then they'd page you again, 911. And that would mean like, you got to call me back within the next minute. And then sometimes you could have like another code with a friend, like what, 888 meant something, but usually it was just 911. But
I thought it was like a way of sending a telegram. So you couldn't send a message.
No,
be like
you just sent a number.
You
just sent a number. Then eventually in the early 2000s, T-Mobile, I think, made like what they called like a sidekick, which flipped up, and then you could type a message. But that was a phone. That was a different thing. That was a phone. But yeah, the pagers, it was just a phone number. And then, so you could enter, in the same way that you could make a calculator say hello, you could make it say hello using like the four and the, so you could do that, but you couldn't really make it say words.
You've just made me remember the other word you can make the calculator say, which is boobless.
Yes. So you could page someone boobless, which could be a very trans-affirming message depending on who you're sending it to.
Well, okay. So I feel like I'm very, very much in the 90s now. I feel like that's been a really useful walk down memory lane. But we're not here to talk about pages and beepers and gadgets and things. We're here to talk about you. So why don't you tell me about you? What was going on for you at this time? Place yourself in that moment when you started going to the Red Spot.
Yeah, I mean, in that moment, I had gone out to the University of British Columbia to do some school, my undergrad. I was still doing my undergrad and had decided that school wasn't for me and had left school and come back to Toronto. I did eventually go back to school and obviously went on to get a doctorate. But at this time I was like, no, I'm done with school. I'm not doing it. I had moved back to Toronto and I was working at the Centre for Women and Trans People. I was out as queer. I had been out since I was 14, so I came out at a relatively young age. And I came out in this backdrop of, I think, a real uptake in visibility for particular queer and trans people. And so, Katie Lang had come out at the same time that I was coming out when I was 14, and she had released Ingenue.
Who did it first? Did you beat Katie or did Katie beat you?
I think it was synonymous. I think it was like literally almost on the exact same timeline. It was kind of amazing, that kind of spring of whatever year that would have been, 1991. And then a couple of years later in the mid 90s, Ellen had, of course, come out, Ellen DeGeneres had come out on her TV show and then, suffered a lot of consequences for that because Disney canceled her show and et cetera. But, and then there was, of course, this emergence of activism and organizing around trans justice that we saw with the delisting in Ontario of sexual reassignment surgery, as it was then called, or what we would now think of as gender affirming surgery, from OHIP. So when that was delisted in 1998, thanks to Mike Harris and the Cuts, a lot of trans community members really galvanized, came together in a very visible way to protest these cuts and to organize. And so there was this hotbed of trans activism brimming that had been there, but that was really becoming quite visible and quite public at that time. And here I am, this young, just about to come out as trans, organizer who was organizing around Black justice and queer justice and trans justice and, doing some initial work around disability organizing in the city, and was really moved by this community that I found myself in, having moved back to Tuggerandeau. One of the things that I felt palpably when I was living in Vancouver at that time was how few Black people I saw on the street and how rare it was to see someone who looked like me. And here I was finding myself back in Toronto, and I was surrounded by this QT BIPOC community. And we were going to these spaces where, it was QT BIPOC folks, were owning and in leadership at the Red Spot. And, Funkasia was there, and these places of coming together where we got to be comfortable and be celebrated and be supported because, of course, in the community at that time, there was a lot, and there still is, of course, a lot of white supremacy, a lot of anti-Blackness. I mean, this is why we saw the creation of things like Aya and Zami, but Aya was a early Black queer group here in Tuggerandeau that used to organize nights to go together to Church Street because people experienced such harassment just trying to get into the bars and clubs. So they would be told, oh, you have an ID from a different country, so we're not going to let you in.
Yeah.
Or, all of these excuses to not let Black and racialized people into the club. So, here we suddenly find the Red Spot, and it was this place that was by us and for us, and it really felt like a home.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so having decided to quit university and come back to the other side of the country, was it your plan to get more involved in activism, or were you like, oh, I'm just going to see what happens when I get there?
I mean, I had been organizing in Vancouver, in Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories around gender justice, largely, mostly at the university, but also in the community, and had been doing some harm reduction stuff in the community there as well. And when I moved back, the last thing on my mind was diving into anything other than just trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And, I was dealing with some, health things at the time, and I was really just, trying to find a quiet place to land. But I am an activist. I am an activist. It's in my heart. It's in my blood. And so, very quickly I got involved in organizing. I started organizing around a lot of disability justice and mad justice based on some of my experiences that I was having going in and out of these hospitals. And, I got involved in organizing at the Center for Women and Trans People and became one of the coordinators there, and quickly got involved in organizing around there was a campaign for a racialized professor at U of T who was being passed over for tenure again and again, Dr. Chun. And so we organized the Justice for Dr. Chun committee, and we were organizing around Black and racial justice. There were, several high-profile killings of Black people by the police and mad people by the police around that time. Faraz Sulman in the late 90s, and of course in the early 2000s, Edmund Yu and Otto Voss. And so we were organizing around all of these things. And I found community through organizing. I found family through organizing. I found partners and friends and met so many important people who are still in my life today through organizing. So, these things really sparked me to want to get actively involved in making activism a big part of how I spent my time on this earth.
And some of that was catalyzed by the red spot, which is what we're here to talk about today. So why don't we start from the beginning? What do you think of when I say the name Red Spot?
Oh, there were so many nights at the Red Spot. So, it definitely makes me think about a time in Tuggeranto in Toronto where that late 90s, early 2000s, some of the organizing that we were doing around racial justice, around abolition, around queer and trans lives, around disability justice, a lot of it centered around and took place in and around the Red Spot. I mean, this was a space that had a trans owner. One of the owners was identified as trans at the time, and maybe still, I'm probably still does. And there was a lot of racialized BIPOC, QT BIPOC, we would now say, queer and trans folks who were hanging out and spending time in and around the Red Spot. So it was a space that was a home for a lot of us. But it's also, it was up a lot of stairs. So it wasn't the most accessible spot. I mean, this was in the 90s when you could smoke inside. So it was really smoky and really, really, really stuffy inside always. And but, it was this home. It was this home for a lot of us. So, yeah, the Red Spot definitely brings back a lot of memories.
And do you remember the very first time you ever went there?
I think I do. I was trying to remember back if the first time that I went there was for an event or just for a regular night. And I was like, no, it was a regular night because I had this friend, Connor, and he had said, oh, we got to go to the Red Spot. We got to go to the Red Spot. And we went all the way up those stairs. And I was like, I am not going to make it. There was a lot of stairs to get to the door. And we made it in, and they had this sort of, it was like tacos and like kind of Mexican food as like a little kitchen like option. Like just they didn't have like a full menu, but like light snacks. And we had tacos or maybe it was a burrito. I can't remember, but some kind of Mexican food, and sat at the bar. And we were talking to this trans femme who was one of the owners. And I was just like, what is this magical place that I've found myself in where, my friend Connor was trans, that this person was trans. I was about to come out as trans and was just sort of like, finding the language. And here I was finding myself with these other trans folks in the space that, was one of the few places on Church Street where I wasn't having decidedly anti-Black things happen.
Well, okay, so I find that really fascinating and exciting that on that very first trip you were like, yeah, this is it. This is magic. This is a place where I need to spend more time. Sorry, I'm putting words in your mouth by saying that.
No, that's very accurate.
But that's the vibe. So what is present in order for you to be so certain on the first visit?
I think it was the vouch of confidence from a friend, right? So already I had heard from Connor and from, a couple of other folks who I organized with that this was a safe place, that this was a good, a good place to go to. So I was already coming with a bit of hope, and then when I got there and I saw this woman of color, helping us to sort of take, we were just chatting about the state of organizing and what was happening in the village. And we were just, we ate these tacos, and it felt very comfortable there. It felt very much like a living room. And it was a very unusual space because it was just like a tooth. Like it went all the way back. It was a very long, narrow subway car, maybe you could think of.
Like a tooth?
Well, a tooth goes all the way up, and you have this long route. So there was.
I see. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, anyways, it felt very much like a cozy kind of living room space. So.
Oh, I want to go there. I mean, stairs notwithstanding, and I'm going to go down a particular line of questioning right now. And if you don't want to talk about this, then say you don't want to talk about this because I don't want to make this whole conversation about this particular subject. I'm over-explaining. You said that in other bars and spaces around the Church Street scene, you felt a sense of anti-Blackness and you didn't feel it within this space.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you pick up immediately when you go into a space?
Well, I mean, so I'll give an example. In 1998 or 1999, I think it was 1998, we did Battle Beats and Rhymes at the Red Spot. And I was coming from home and I was rushing to get to the event. And it was a special event. It was, a night of celebration of these artists. And so I had dressed up. So I was wearing this outfit that my parents had gotten me from Ghana. And it had this sort of top with sort of African Dutch wax fabric, and then this sort of bottom that kind of tied up, and then this sort of headpiece that went with it. And I got out of the taxi a bit up from the Red Spot, so maybe even as far up as Wellesley, I can't remember. I got up and I was walking back down. And when I got out of the cab and I was closing the door, these two white guys passed me and said, "Happy Kwanzaa!" And I was like, right, I'm Black. Thank you for reminding me that I am Black. You need me to know that you know that I'm Black and that I'm somehow out of place here. This is nowhere near Kwanzaa. It was like the summer. There was like, it wasn't, Kwanzaa's in December. And that was on my way to the Red Spot, So it was moments like that where it was just this constant othering. You don't belong here. Why are you here? I can remember sitting on the steps, of course, the beloved steps, which is actually a whole podcast for another day, but we could talk about the steps forever, that we're in front of the Second Cup at Church in Wellesley. And I can remember sitting with a friend who I worked with actually at the Center for Women and Trans People. And I had my goddaughter with me, and she was a baby at the time. And she's Black and I'm Black and I'm holding this baby. And I don't know if it was, this combination of being Black and having a kid, or if it was just me having a kid. This is at a different time, of course, thinking about this moment where, now trans parenting and queer parenting is just so much part of the zeitgeist and so much part of our lives. But this was at a time, and they said, this is the queer village, right? That's what the person sitting on the steps said to me. And I said, yeah, right? So this way that we're kind of always already on the outside, this pervasive anti-Blackness that sort of thread through this, you're always already a newcomer. This idea that white people created the queer movement, which isn't actually accurate. When you look, I'm not saying that white people weren't involved. They were. It took all of us to get to the place that we've gotten to now. But the organizing and the resistance, particularly against police brutality targeting trans and gender nonconforming people by people here in Tuggerandeau, like Monica Forrester, and in the States, folks like, of course, Miss Major and Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, and the Screaming Queens at the Compton Cafeteria riot in the Tenderloin districts in 1966. It was like racialized people fighting back. And their stories somehow didn't translate into this present that I was living, where I was being told that me, as a Black trans person, I'm a newcomer to the village and I must be out of place. I must have taken a wrong turn. I can't possibly be coming here because I too am queer. I too am trans, right? And so it's just this way that an unwelcoming that can happen when we come into the village because of the anti-Blackness that so many people were experiencing. Why are you here? Why have you come here? This can't possibly be a space for you.
And it's always this really weird way in which people deliver it. It's not a microaggression, so that's not the right thing for me to say. But if you ever have a problem or confront someone about that, the response is always like, oh, I wasn't doing it seriously. It was just a silly joke. Like, why are you so uptight? And then you get put in this weird position where you can't, there's nothing that you can say without just seeming like
That's
you're
the
being
thing.
hysterical.
And then the reaction is that, you're kind of overly sensitive. When the reality is that it's just like, no, I'm actually, I'm speaking about what's happening right now. But this is one of the things that happens with white supremacy is that we're taught for it to be invisibilized. So when it's present, when anti-Blackness presents itself, we're taught to not see it. We're supposed to not see it. And when we call it out and say this is happening, everything is pulled out to show that it's not, even when it is.
Yeah. How do you respond to that when that happens, when you're put in that position?
I'm a big proponent really one of the most important things is care. So it depends on the situation, and it depends on what's going to be the most careful and full of care thing that I can do for my brain and my body. And so sometimes that means not engaging and turning and doing something different. But sometimes it does mean engaging. Sometimes it means advocating. Sometimes it means calling out. Sometimes it means amplifying and illustrating, to a large audience, this is what's happening, and it's looked a lot of different ways.
Yeah. And I think it's just so important to remind people of self-care. I think it's one of those things that I never appreciated is a completely valid tactic and something that, you should be putting your safety above everyone else. So thanks for that reminder. I wanted to also have a chat with you about your trans identity, for want of a better term. You mentioned earlier that you, at this point in time, were slowly edging towards becoming the person that you are. Are you comfortable talking about that?
Yeah, it hadn't occurred to me at 14 that everybody didn't think about transitioning their gender. I assumed everybody thought that. Which I'm thankful that somehow my brain normalized it so much that I was like, this is a perfectly everyday experience. And obviously everybody's thinking this. I had seen an episode, probably a terrible transphobic episode of, I think it might have been The Fifth Estate, sometime in the 80s, about trans people. And I somehow planted that in my brain that there was a possibility of this, and it had just stayed dormant until, I guess puberty, and then I was like, when I grow up, I'm going to be a man. And I was talking on the phone with my then girlfriend in high school. I was in grade 9, and we had this, girlfriend is a very strong word. In grade 9 for me, I was like, oh, we'll pass notes after class, and it was pretty chaste stuff. We watched movies together, like that kind of thing. But anyway, so we were talking on the phone, and he said to me, I'm a man, and I'm going to transition, and when I grow up, I'm going to become a man. And I said, yeah. Because again, I'm still thinking everybody thinks this, right? So I'm like, why is he telling me this, right? I'm like, yeah, no, me too, yeah. And he's like, no, I'm saying, and I don't think we had the word trans. I don't think that was the word that we had, but I can't remember what words he used. But he was like, no, like I'm gonna have surgery and I'm gonna become a man. And I was like, yeah, And then it was like, oh, wait a minute, this is actually not everyone's experience. And then I realized that this was something that was different than perhaps my friends and my peers, and that.
Sorry to be giggling. I'm just thinking about this poor man plucked up all the courage to be like, I'm coming out. I'm gonna tell Cyrus, and then you were just like,
right? I was I just didn't get what the big not that but I was like, oh, where's the gravitas coming from? Like, why is this a big deal? Everybody feels this way, and he's like, no, they don't. It just had never occurred to me. It had never occurred to me. So I had not the best experience coming out as queer, and so I had experienced a lot of homophobia at home. My family totally did their homework and came along and are champions of queer and trans rights now, and do such amazing work in our family, in our communities. Like they're really amazing. But at the time, they didn't have the knowledge and they didn't have the information, and they were not the best. They did not handle it well. And so I knew, oh God, I'm not going to tell them this then, because if I tell them this, who knows what will happen. So it wasn't until I was, 19, 20, again, in this community, finding myself in this community in Taekwondo where there was a lot of trans people around. I was working at the center and there were trans people involved in the collective. There were trans people doing workshops and organizing. There was all this trans activism happening in the community around the delisting of gender-affirming surgery. And at OPIRG, across the hall from where I worked, where I was a board member, there were trans people on the board. There were trans people working there. So I was in this little bubble of a lot of trans people and a lot of trans people of color. So it made a possibility model for me. Like, it made it seem very doable to imagine living the life that I had always dreamed, because I was watching these people do it every day. They were doing it. And so I chose to come out to my family. I chose to socially transition at first, and then try to access medical transition, which at the time was very, very difficult to access. And I did, the things that I wanted to do to sort of move into the life that I had been dreaming of living. And, my family really struggled. Again, they really had a hard time at first, but, again, really, really came around. But in a way, because I was so surrounded by this community, it was less isolating than my experience of coming out in high school. When I came out in high school and experienced homophobia at home, it wasn't like there was a really big supportive queer community at school. There was no GSA, there was no space for queer youth at the time. So
this sounds like the 90s to me. Yeah.
Yes, I was really deeply kind of hidden. So it was a really different experience to be coming out as trans in this community of trans people, so that no matter what was happening in a day-to-day, we were connected. And we helped each other to get access to doctors. We helped each other to learn how to navigate the gender identity clinic if we ended up going that route. We helped each other to fundraise for surgery. We helped each other again and again and again to survive. And I'm so thankful to have come out in that community and to have been able to be part of shaping, trans research and resource development that helped more trans people to be able to access healthcare and love and, the kinds of things that we need to thrive, really.
Okay, so I'm really sorry if this is a really stupid question, but I just want to double check that I've understood. So you knew that you were trans when you were like 13, 14, but you decided not to come out until much later, even though you came out as queer.
I had such a negative experience with coming out as queer and I think I didn't have the language for queer. I think I didn't. I think I might have, maybe I used the word lesbian. I can't really remember feeling like that word fit for me because I was a trans man, but I didn't know any other words, and it wasn't until university that I really got introduced to queer as a positive or reclaimed word. But anyways, I had whatever words I used, and I had such a difficult experience coming out as this young queer person that I felt certain that I was going to be ostracized for coming out as trans, because I realized, especially after this conversation with this friend, who had come out to me and his fears, laid out. He was like, look, I have to do this and I'm scared I'm going to lose everything. And I was like, oh, you can lose everything for this. People are so afraid of trans that you could lose everything. And I had already lost a lot, as coming out as queer because of the homophobia I experienced. And so I was really worried. So I tucked it away. And because my experience as a trans man is very gender fluid and is very non-binary in a lot of ways, for me, I found a way to just keep being me as best as I could while not really talking about some of the things that I was thinking about. And then it came to a crisis point because at 19, when I had my first really deep depression, I had depression as a child, which is just so terrible. But this was my first really sort of deep depression as a teen. A lot of that had to do with me choosing life and choosing to be here and choosing to fight had a lot to do with me also deciding if I'm going to stay, if I'm going to be here, it has to be on my own terms. And so I have to come out. I have to live the kind of life where when I go into the bathroom and I look in the mirror, I see myself looking back, and I hadn't felt that. I had seen myself in the mirror and seen someone else looking back.
And does that change for you? Like immediately, did that change for you when you said to yourself, yeah, I'm a man?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say it changed that day, but I think that certainly saying I'm trans, this isn't my name, the name you've all been calling me my whole life, it's not my name. I'm certain it's not my name. And I need to use pronouns that feel better for me, I want to use he, him pronouns. Those things together really started me down a road of feeling like authentic, a bit more authentic in myself. And like I was living my life, not someone else's life that other people expected me to be living. And it really, when I had I chose to have top surgery in 2007 or 2008, I can't remember. And that was like, that was such a life-changing experience for me. And I really felt like, this life is possible, and when I was younger, I always dreamed that I could sort of run away to an accepting community where I would be able to be free to explore who I was, as I was constantly hearing, you got to find out who you are and, discover yourself and learn about yourself, but not if you're trans. Not if you're trans, don't do that. So I wanted to be able to be free to explore who I was the same way that the cis people around me were being encouraged to do so. But I thought I had to run away to get to do that. And in the end, it turns out that I stayed exactly where I was. I was in Tuggerondo. I was in my home community. And I turned back towards these people who had all of these expectations about what I needed to do and be. And I said, I'd love to introduce myself. I'd love to re-meet you because here's who I am. And for me, it didn't necessarily mean that a lot was different. I was the same person, but I just was able to present myself and to be seen in a way that was more genuine to how I wanted to be seen.
I find it so fascinating that so many queer kids come to this same conclusion of, oh yeah, I'm just going to abandon everything, start all over again, give up every single element of my life, and that's the easiest, best way forward. It's kind of like sad and comforting at the same time. Anyway, why don't we go back to the red spot? And I want to ask you, what did the red spot teach you about yourself?
It taught me that I'm somebody who thrives in a sense of community. It taught me that I thrive when I get to be around other trans people. It's a real gift. It's a real gift and honoring and celebration of this universe for me to get to be around these magical beings. And so I felt that there, and it taught me this is a value. This is an essential part of how I want to live my life, is to be in community with other trans people, in particular BIPOC trans folks. And I think it taught me that a lot of activism can happen through artistic practice, because I was going to these events where DJs and spoken word artists and dancers and performers were making work about the social world and the justice issues of our time, and were inspiring so many people to get involved in organizing.
And my final question, if we can go proper cheesy here, please tell me you'll go proper cheesy with me. If you could go back and give a word of advice to that Cyrus that first went up those stairs on the first night at the Red Spot, what advice would you give?
Well, one, very practically, I would ask that younger me to take pictures, because I really wish that we had more pictures.
No camera on your pager though, eh?
In the pager. Yeah, I wish that we had pictures, but I would also, I think to me, I would say it is possible to live the life that you've always dreamed of. And if you want it, I'm here to tell you, you could choose life, and that it can be a really great life. And I don't know what is going to happen, but I would definitely tell myself, I don't know what's going to happen now. I don't know where we're headed. We seem in such an anti-trans and anti-Black climate. But I think I would want to let myself know at that time that it is possible to change the world, and that I should get involved immediately.
Do you have any memories from the Red Spot, or maybe from your own queer scene that you want to share? Well, if you do, I want to hear all about it, so why not get in touch? I want to create the biggest online record of people's memories and stories of queer clubbing and organizing and activism, but I need your help. Go to lostspacespodcast.com, find the section Share a Lost Space, and then tell me all about what it is you got up to. You can also reach out to me on Facebook and Instagram, where my handle is Lost Spaces Pod. Find out more about Cyrus by following him on Instagram at Syrus Marcus, or Twitter, where it's Syrus Marcus Ware, or just visit his website, which is cyrusmarcusware.com. And the links to all of these are in the show notes for this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate if you took the time to subscribe, leave a review on your podcast platform of choice, or just telling other people who you think might be interested in giving it a little listen too. My name is Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.